Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are diving into one of the most tense developments in Europe as Estonia, a small but strategically critical NATO member, has made it clear that it is ready to bring down Russian aircraft if they violate Allied airspace. This statement comes at a time when relations between Russia and NATO are at their lowest since the Cold War, with the ongoing war in Ukraine, sanctions, military buildups, and constant air and sea confrontations. Estonia's warning is not just rhetoric, it is a direct message aimed at Moscow that NATO's eastern flank is not a weak point, but a shield that will be defended with force if necessary. When we look at Estonia's position, it is vital to understand the geography and history of the region. Estonia is one of the Baltic states, bordering Russia directly and having endured decades of Soviet occupation until 1991. This history alone makes Estonia one of the most cautious and vigilant nations when it comes to Moscow's behavior. The war in Ukraine has only reinforced these fears, as Estonia and its Baltic neighbors see themselves as the next possible targets of Russian aggression. Therefore, when Estonia says it is ready to take down Russian jets in NATO skies, it is a warning that comes with both historical memory and strategic necessity. Estonia's defense relies heavily on NATO. Unlike Russia, it does not possess a massive air force or large-scale missile systems. Instead, it has invested in integrated air defense systems and relies on NATO's rotational air policing mission. Since joining NATO in 2004, Estonia has hosted Allied aircraft from multiple member states, with countries like Germany, Italy, the UK, and the US regularly deploying fighter jets to patrol Baltic airspace. These NATO jets intercept Russian aircraft almost weekly, as Moscow constantly tests the air defense readiness of NATO by sending planes close to or into Allied airspace without transponders. Estonia's readiness to engage Russian aircraft means that any violation will no longer just be shadowed, but could end in live fire. This raises the stakes significantly. If an Estonian or NATO fighter were to shoot down a Russian jet, it could trigger a dangerous escalation. Russia would likely retaliate with military or hybrid measures, and NATO would face the challenge of responding firmly while avoiding all-out war. Estonia, however, is not bluffing. It has repeatedly urged NATO to reinforce the eastern flank with more troops, more aircraft, and stronger air defenses. Its leaders argue that the only language Moscow understands is strength, and therefore deterrence must be backed by the willingness to use force. Putin's government has already reacted with warnings of its own. Russian officials claim that NATO's presence near its borders is a provocation and accuse the alliance of threatening Russia's sovereignty. However, Russia's own actions in Ukraine undermine these arguments, as it was Moscow that launched a full-scale invasion of its neighbor. Estonia and NATO point to this as proof that Russian threats cannot be taken lightly. In fact, Estonia spends well above the NATO guideline of 2% of GDP on defense, signaling its seriousness about security. From a military standpoint, Estonia's readiness to engage Russian aircraft is not based on its own capacity alone, but on NATO's Article 5 guarantee, which states that an attack on one member is an attack on all. This makes the warning far more powerful because Russia knows that a confrontation with Estonia would not remain local. It would involve the entire alliance. The presence of US forces, British troops, and other NATO contingents in the Baltics ensures that Moscow cannot simply isolate and intimidate Estonia as it might smaller, non-aligned states. But why does Estonia feel the need to make such a bold statement now? The answer lies in recent incidents. Russian aircraft have been increasingly aggressive near NATO airspace, including near Estonia. There have also been reports of GPS jamming, cyber attacks, and disinformation campaigns aimed at undermining Estonia's government and its public trust. Estonia sees these hybrid tactics as precursors to more aggressive moves, and by signaling readiness to defend its skies, it hopes to deter Russia from testing NATO further. This is also a message to NATO itself. The Baltic states have long worried that Western Europe and the US might not take their security as seriously as their own. By publicly declaring that it is ready to down Russian aircraft, Estonia is reminding the alliance that deterrence must be credible. The credibility of NATO's security guarantee depends on actual readiness to act. If NATO were seen as hesitant or unwilling to defend its members, Russia could exploit this weakness, just as it has done with non-NATO neighbors like Georgia and Ukraine. Putin's calculations are now more complicated. On one hand, Russia cannot afford a direct war with NATO, as that would overstretch its already strained military. On the other hand, Moscow thrives on projecting power and testing the resolve of its adversaries. The Kremlin may continue to send jets close to NATO airspace to see whether Estonia's words will be backed up with action. In such a case, a single miscalculation or accident could ignite a chain of events leading to open confrontation. The global implications of Estonia's warning are also significant. If a Russian jet were downed, the world would witness the first direct clash between NATO and Russia since the Cold War. This would send shockwaves across Europe, the US, and beyond, with financial markets destabilized, global security structures shaken, and the risk of escalation spreading to other regions like the Black Sea or the Arctic. It would also put immense pressure on NATO leaders to manage escalation while proving unity. Estonia's stance is also about signaling resolve to its own citizens. The Estonian people, living next to Russia, need to trust that their government and NATO will not allow another occupation or aggression. Strong words and clear warnings reassure the public that Estonia will not be left vulnerable. This domestic factor is just as important as the international dimension. For Estonia, deterrence is not just about diplomacy, it is about survival. Looking at NATO's broader strategy, Estonia's warning fits within the alliance's new defense posture, which emphasizes forward defense rather than delayed response. NATO is moving from rotational forces to more permanent deployments in Eastern Europe, with prepositioned equipment, rapid deployment units, and enhanced missile defenses. Estonia wants this trend to continue and expand, ensuring that Russia knows any aggression would be met immediately and decisively. In conclusion, Estonia's warning that it is ready to bring down Russian jets is a bold, calculated, and risky statement. It reflects the fear and determination of a small nation living on the front line of NATO's confrontation with Russia. It signals to Moscow that provocations will not go unanswered, to NATO that deterrence must remain credible, and to its citizens that their country will not bow to intimidation. The stakes are enormous, because one wrong move in Baltic skies could set off a spiral toward a much larger conflict. Putin has been warned, and Estonia has drawn a line in the air. The coming months will test whether these warnings lead to greater deterrence or to a dangerous clash that the world hopes to avoid.